Welcome back, folks. Solo Gamers back again, continuing with our Polymega showcase. And today, well, in this segment, we'll be doing RoboCop. Now, this is the original NES game, released in 1989, and near the end of the game, near the end of the unit's lifespan too. So you can see they were really starting to push the tech here. Now, granted, many people who know RoboCop the game will think of the arcade game, and rightly so. It was at the time a phenomenal piece of Data East system work, but it was still, by all accounts, a product of its era. This game had a lot of great features, but also had many problems. One of the biggest ones being its controls, because they had to try and handle weapons, maneuverability. But they also had to acknowledge the fact that, he's a big hunkin' heavy dude with no jump ability. This is back when dogs could be considered enemies and you could shoot them without guilt because they just kind of looked like weird blobs. Now you could shoot in multiple directions, and you could aim directly ahead or directly up. You could also crouch and shoot, which was a neat thing at the time. But I mean, it's not the first time that had been done in a game. Now this guy, you cannot actually shoot him. He's got the armor. What you can do is you can just get him in the corner, and once you get him in the corner, you can just pound the crap out of him. But the thing was, usually to do that, you'd have a turbo controller, and you just boom, 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 and just punch the ever-living crap out. But the game was notoriously difficult and had no continue function, so you just kind of had to live with it. My cousins and I spent who knows how much time trying to beat that darn thing, and honestly, it was a fun game, but it was difficult, very challenging. Now, here's yet another game from my past, Cycross. Cycross is considered a sort of, I guess they consider it like a action racer. Lord if I know, but but it was an interesting and fast-paced game that had really high speed, really cool action. But it was also incredibly challenging at times because anything could kill you. And really, the game was about making it as far as you could before you either ran out of energy or died. I mean, it's not a super complex game. I'd be lying if I said it was. But it's fun. And challenging in a real sense. Like, you have to try and plan everything out while avoiding getting hit or damaged or running into obstacles, because certain obstacles will instant kill you. And if you hit an obstacle, you're done. You also gotta keep collecting as many energy packs or chargers as you can, because when you're out, that's it. Game over. Yep. I'm almost out. Yep. And that's it. And then you pick up right where you left off and continue forward. simple, addictive, classic NES style. No real major change. Only complaint I ever had about games like this was that there wasn't really... It was all about score back then. It wasn't really like a main objective. It was like, nah, just play the game, rush through as much as you can, get the highest score, and then try to beat the other one. You could play a two-player, which was fun, because you could actually challenge each other and to see who was the best. And that was typical of this era of gaming. Still, fun game, simple play, and it's good for like a 5 or 10 minute rush when you just want to get in and get down to the nitty gritty. 15,000, not bad. But it is a simple game, fun, efficient, simplistic. Now, to a game that deserves proper recognition. There we go. This is one of the first 3 games I ever owned, and I actually have another one that I'll show you in a bit that I also owned. Well, 2 others actually. TNC Surf Design, and this was at the time. This was arguably some of the coolest. This was some of the coolest gaming of its era. It was also one of the first games to really embrace this sort of 80s, 90s surfer culture. But it was absolutely brutal and did not joke around. If you didn't know how to play, you were hosed. And there were 2 different modes, or you could play them as a team. Now, the whole purpose of this, and God, it has been forever since I played, was you were supposed to get like you were supposed to maneuver yourself up, and then you were supposed to hit the heights and do jumps and stuff. The problem was that wave is constantly chasing you, so if you don't do it carefully, you wouldn't be able to keep going, and eventually the wave wipes you out either way. But if you could get far enough ahead and build up enough momentum, you could jump the waves and keep going. But yeah, it was one of those games that it had a very specific process that you had to follow. And if you understood that, you could play, and I did a 45-minute run on this when I was a kid. But now it feels incredibly difficult. And I feel like a lot of that's because we don't remember how these things worked. So, anyway. Now this, if you were a kid in the 80s and 90s, you remember Tiny Toon Adventures. It was everywhere. And honestly, it was actually, it's honestly one of the best and most entertaining platformers of its era. It's also incredibly difficult. And a lot of that boils down to the fact that it had 2 things. One, you had 0 life, so you get hit once, it's over, unless you had the heart. If you had the heart gave you an extra boost. The carrots act like your coins, the usual. And then there's this guy who basically acts like he's basically a bulldozer. But there's certain things in the game that he can tear through that others cannot. And yes, he is supposed to be like the Tasmanian devil. Now, the game isn't super long. Like if you knew how to play, you could beat it in a couple of hours, or probably in about 40 minutes, really. But the game was a lot of direct, simple, entertaining fun. Didn't, wasn't too difficult. But like the whole theme of it is Buster has the range. Taz has insane destructive power. But what made this game stand out, what made it so memorable, was that it kept the personality of the characters. The attitude, the whole style, all of it was really on the nose and very poignant. And for a lot of us, we loved it. Whoa, big dog. But it wasn't a challenging game. It wasn't super difficult. It was just get through the level. Oops. But the thing is, if you lost, you had to start all over again. And that was incredibly vexing. And yes, for those of you saying, wow, this kind of reminds me of Mario. Yeah, and? You're surprised? I don't mean to be... Now, the reason the cat's useful is because he doesn't have the hop distance that Buster does, and he can't fly the way that the duck does. But he can actually climb on walls, and there are some times when that's useful. But it was actually possible. This is actually a known trick. Is if you keep repeating the first few stages, you can essentially acquire infinite lives if you're patient. Like, I'm not saying it's a good idea, but I'm saying it can be done. I see, I should have kept the cat, but that's alright. I ain't picky. But yeah, this game was, by and large, one of the best games of its era, and one of the last real games made for the Nintendo. And see, there you have it. That heart gives you the ability to take an additional hit and keep going. But it means if you take... But then you have to be careful not to let yourself get hit again. And this is basically just keep away from her for a certain amount of time. But yeah, it's an interesting game, and honestly kind of silly, but it's fun. But it is what it is. Anyway, moving on to the last of the NES lineup, WWE WrestleMania, or WWF WrestleMania, because it was still WWF back then. And WWF WrestleMania was one of the other games alongside Darkwing Duck, Busters, Mario, of course, and a few others that I owned as a kid. My collection wasn't huge, but it was pretty good. And for its era, this game actually had a pretty distinct and pretty clear list of characters. Unfortunately, its biggest issue was because it was limited to 2 buttons. The controls were incredibly basic. It wasn't really that. It wasn't really that. It also had a pretty decent little loop soundtrack for what it was. But I always thought it was kind of silly. But I remember me and my friends used to spend hours trying to one-up each other with this. But it was, like I said, this was early 90s. Well, no, this was 89, yeah. This was right when wrestling was at its pinnacle for that era. This was before the Austin era really took off later on. And this was when Hulk was still like considered the best. But like a big part of the problem was this game didn't tell you how to do darn near anything. Couldn't even figure out how to grapple half the time if you didn't. There's Hulk's theme. But yeah, it was a simple game. Basically a brawler. But because the game didn't have any real functions or any real instructions for the time, you just kind of went with it. Anyway, honestly, you used to remember playing that thing to death back in the day, but now it's clear it's a product of its era and a very minimal one at that. And of course, like Bad News Baseball, I must have put so many hours into that. That being said, let's move on to some other games I've got real quick. We'll do Airstrike Patrol real fast. Now, this was right around the time, like this was 95, so this was right around the time the Super Nintendo was really hitting its stride. So yeah, this was Airstrike Patrol, and it was one of those. It was a game that definitely knew it was trying to do a serious X is afterburner, A is flare, B is missile, Y is gun. Very simple. But it was trying to make use of the scaling and rotation function that was prevalent, and I mean very prevalent, in the Super Nintendo era, because it was the new feature. You only have 60 hours. Alright, here we go.
Good luck.
And see, this is actually kind of cool. Like, this was, at the time, this was like super next gen. But it was also like incredibly new because you didn't see this kind of thing on a lot of home consoles. So you kind of had to get it where you could. That being said, I kind of wish I had the manual so I understood what my actual goals and objectives are here, but I do notice you can tell there's some very weird sort of screen tear, though I don't know if that shows up on yours because it might just be due to my system. Start dropping some heavy ordnance. I think that's all of it. See? not bad, but definitely something where I would recommend having. Where I would definitely recommend having like an actual menu or manual for understanding how the game works. So, next and last for this video, we'll roll into battle cars. Now, I actually owned this as a kid. Well, not as a kid, in middle and high school. Before I got my PlayStation, this was one of my favorite games. Super simple little racer, but it was a lot of fun because like it was actually like, oh yeah, no, you're not just racing. You're also going to be blowing the ever-living crud out of each other. Toxic Green. New Detroit. So yeah, like it's a basic racer, but it was one of those that used the Mode 7 systems. It also had like the squirreliest controls of any game I've ever played for the time. And that was because the game moved at such a speed, like you were like just crazy. Now, interesting, the triggers are used to actually give you a bit of a turn boost. And once you understand that, you can make the turns real smooth. But yeah, like the game's a simple game, but it's fun. Just get real engaged on this. And you get points for every one of these guys you take out of the game. You got points, so. Yeah. But yeah, it was a simple racer, but it was a lot of fun, especially when you got deeper into it and you had a fully uploaded and ready to roll car. Now, I'm going to pause it here, be back in just a bit for one more round, and then I'll show you some of the other stuff I picked up for the Super Nintendo packaging as of late. Catch you later.